boy, you can't get a break unless, of course, it's your neck. Of course, it's my choice to walk down the hill at Isham Park, but this is the best walk. It's the medium walk. Not doing a short circuit around the Park Terrace Gardens or just the upper park, and not going all the way down to Inwood Hill Park. So this is the best compromise, and it has me taking this one of the very few shortcuts between the upper area here and down there, which is kind of Broadway level. That's Isham Street up there. And I thought I'd continue my videos this morning because I am thinking about my daughter's education, and it's always been a pet project of mine to try and get her interested in programming and robots and 3D printing and eventually nano fabrication. And you might have heard me refer to the Tardigrade circus. If you go and Google water bears, you'll have a delightful little discovery. They're things that might actually be xenobiology. They're like a platypus. There's a category of this animal in various species, but no other animal directly adjacent to it. It's one of a kind, and they can survive in the vacuum of space and radiation and freezing temperatures and all the rest of that stuff that you would need for a pansporia scenario. And they're cute to boot. So as all this stuff comes together, you know, I certainly plan to have nano robots interacting with water bears on trampolines and tight ropes that we 3D printed with tomorrow's version of this stuff that has some fab facilities in it, so you can print circuit boards and have some maybe you know, real, I don't know, microcosm of the world. You know, it's like Pet Rocks 2.0 or a zillion.0. Anyway, that's a long way off in the future. You know, the first step is just to find tardigrades, using that process of collecting some moss and soaking it in water and looking at it under a microscope. So we're going to be going in tiny little baby steps, and along the way, it's not all going to be about tardigrades and 3D printing. It's a lot going to be about computers and programming and logic and the difference between digital technology and analog. And it's time to build her a computer. You've seen me pick out the parts for the Raspberry Pi computer, and those parts are arriving. I don't want to deny her from the proprietary world and the highest quality software out there, so I'll also be setting her up either with a Mac laptop or something along those lines, which will also give her access to whatever we bought in the Apple ecosystem, her iTunes movies, her Disney movies on iTunes. So there is that, and that leads to, you know, how it's not going to be a one-faceted education. She's going to see all the many faces of technology, proprietary and open, and the relative advantages and disadvantages of each. And I will try and put it in the simplest terms possible. Come on, dog. You are, what, not wanting to walk? Okay, let's just change our path a little, see if he wants to go a different way. So, the Raspberry Pi, a Mac station, what else? Are you just really not walking? Come on, dog. This is not your choice. Yeah, walking a dog is interesting, and walking a Bouvier is even more interesting. As a breed, you know, they're very capable. They can be trained to do anything, but they have this aspect to them where they, in the end, do what they think is right. There's stories about how during World War II or the beginning of World War II, Hitler, having heard of the Bouvier, considering it as the official dog of the Third Reich said, "Bring me a fine specimen to see." And so the Bouv breeder got his finest Bouvier. He was sitting there looking majestic. Hitler walks up, puts his hand out, and then the Bouvier proceeds to clamp down on his hand, and Hitler orders them all exterminated, and they have to be hidden during World War II, having already been decimated during World War I for their work in hulling cannonballs and pulling wounded soldiers out of trenches. And who knows? I mean, this is what, the internet scuttlebutt has about this breed. And they've only just apparently been reestablished as a recognized breed in the dog shows. And, well, they're fun. They're great with kids. And sometimes you got to encourage them to keep walking. Even though he loves snow. So where was I? Addie's education. Oh yeah, everything's Addie's education, isn't it? Even the Bouvier decision. She's a kid who's gonna, have the same, set of sensibilities, or she's gonna have a set of sensibilities for dealing with the microscopic animals that you don't want to crush with a microscope, and 100-pound dogs that, as soon as she thinks she's old enough, she's going to try and walk under our supervision, and she's already, a rough and tumble kid ready to get, knocked around and stand right back up by a 100-pound giant puppy. And, technology is just one of those many pieces. I think it's a big piece. I think that making technology education as part of the standard curriculum, making it as first class as reading, writing, and arithmetic, gets a lot of lip service, but is rarely ever done, because what do? Technology is so changing, and you can teach people general logic, but what good is general logic if you can't sit down at a machine and make it do your bidding? So, of course, of all the people out there in the world, the one that has done something about it in a meaningful way has been Eben Upton of the Raspberry Pi Foundation, with the very, correct set of presumptions that it needs to be a computer cheaper than a textbook about computers, and it's got to be a decent computer that could turn kids on. And when you learn programming, it can't just be typing in, but it's got to be the visual stuff, maybe symbolic drag and drop programming with applications like Scratch. And sure, it's 3 years later before the hardware is powerful enough to satisfy most adult computer users, but it's only 3 years, and at that rate it has far exceeded Moore's Law if you look at the specs of the new Raspberry Pi versus the original one from only 3 years ago. So, yeah, let's see. Now it's possible. Sitting down at mom and dad's computer, or even some little computer or Android tablet that you buy for the kid, just doesn't do it, because it's loaded with proprietary stuff. You're not learning the generic underpinnings. And with Raspberry Pi, there's this, you see it through and through. While it's true, Debian is just another spin, or Raspbian is just another spin of a desktop system to emulate a Mac or a Windows machine. You have to type Start X before you get it. The Raspberry Pi, by default, I believe even under Noobs, after you do the install, brings you to just an old-fashioned terminal. And it at least forces you to type in that one word, and that opens your eye to the fact that underlying every, consumer pandering, slick product out there, from, iPhones to, car dashboards, there is the old-fashioned type-in user interface underneath, the command line, some form of shell, and the desktop environment, the drag and drop clicking mouse environment that we all know, is just one of many faces that you can put on it. And that was almost unbelievable to people that was the case. And of course, the other guy who's made a difference out there in a totally different way, it's like yin and yang. You got your Eben Upton of the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and then you've got Steve Jobs, who's like, people just want stuff to work. They'll pay money for, quality and superior product, you know, and you know, it's almost proprietary through and through, except for the foundation. Unlike Microsoft, who has an utterly proprietary foundation down to the core and down to the kernel, meaning there is no freedom, there is no portability of software at the system level. Thank you. The Macintosh and iOS are Unix underneath of it, not just Linux, but industry compliant POSIX. That's the Portable Operating System Standard from a standards commission that said this is what Unix is. And most Linuxes are not even that, but Macs, yep, they're it. So in the early days of the port of the Mac to Intel hardware, there was this double miracle, ported to Intel hardware or I should say x86 type hardware, although it is mostly Intel, plus the porting of the operating system from their old, you know, PowerPC Motorola architecture to Unix underneath. And he pulled off a double miracle, kept software compatibility. Processors just were that powerful at that point that they could have these layers of compatibility, which are mostly now unnecessary. It's many years later. But in those early days, you had this unholy alliance of Unix geeks, where a computer wasn't real unless it was Unix, with design geeks who loved their Macs. And the software back in those days, before Adobe sold out and traded their allegiance, was in fact superior. Many things only existed on the Mac in those days, with the one exception of Flash, which was a PC technology. And let's see, so proprietary, Steve Jobs, better, superior products. It is true, when you control things from conception to delivery into the consumer's hands and all the transactions and interactions with services that follow, you can make a higher quality product, a higher quality experience, higher quality everything. And people hate that. They badmouth Steve Jobs, they badmouth everything Apple, but, you know, I always think there's a tinge of jealousy behind that. You know, no one who's part of that open world, who likes everything free and likes infinite customizability choices, will accept the inherent superiority of proprietary and what most people want. It satisfies the 80-20 rule. It gives 80% of the people what they want with 20% of the features, and you use all that excess capacity of not exploring all those little nooks and crannies of capability into a tightly controlled experience, running a very tight ship. And so Addy will see both worlds, and I'll put it in the most simple terms possible, the world of Apple and the world of Raspberry Pi. And yes, there's this other stuff out there, and we'll use other robots. He's using Dash and Dot, and that used to be Bo and Yanni on Kickstarter, and that has software to control it on Android and iPad. And so we'll go back and forth, and you know, we'll use other robots, Lego Mindstorms, and simulated ones on computer, and try and tie it back into her interest with animals, and hopefully give her this just wonderful holistic view of the reality of programming, which is that it permeates all things. It is the reason all things do what they do, from animal behavior to human social behavior to machines. And the better you understand this fact, and the better you can influence programming and partake in the world of programming, the more powerful you are in society. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and then the fourth under-acknowledged R of reasoning, which also is programming. So thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you soon. And don't forget to subscribe.